Wade mark. Saying 4 minutes. At the 5-minute mark, you will get one. Take 5 minutes and you should wrap up or be close.
national anthem of Trinidad and Tobago, followed by a prayer.
Almighty God, we offer our prayers to you and seek your protection for everyone in our blessed country. We pray, O God, for you to protect us from harm and sickness, so that we may have the strength to look after one another. O merciful Lord, we pray that you will continue to bless our land and those who cultivate our crops, so that there may always be food. We pray that no one will ever go hungry. Grant us understanding, equal vision, and balanced minds. Guide us along a path of faith, devotion, and wisdom. Help us to recognize that each of us is equal, that we are all equal in humanity. Give us your protection so that we may live in safety together and grow strong and free together. We pray that everyone will find love and peace in their daily lives. Dear God, we pray for our political leader. We pray for members of this team. Protect them, God, and give them the strength and courage to continue their service to our nation without fear or favor. Thank you, God, for keeping your children free in our democratic state, where every creed and race finds an equal place. Dear God, we beseech you to bless our leaders, bless our people, and bless our country.
Good evening. My name is Dr. Kirk Megu, PRO of the United National Congress, the official opposition of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. I want to welcome you to this important and exciting event, our powerhouse roundtable and webinar, Why Repeal the Procurement Amendment? For those of you who may be wondering what procurement means, it's really just a fancy way of saying giving out contracts. So this is about stopping corruption. Today I'm joined by a very distinguished panel of speakers, crossing all party loyalties and all the other divides that people try to put between us in Trinidad and Tobago. We are here today, united as citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, working for a better future. From the UNC, we have the Leader of Opposition, the Honorable Kamala Prasad-Bissessar, Senior Counsel, and Senator Wade Mark. Joining them on the panel are our independent guest speakers, who are here purely for the love of country and not for political reasons. They are former PNM Minister of Finance, Karen Nunez-Tesheira, former President of the Senate and legal luminary, Timothy Hamel-Smith, former Minister of Foreign Affairs, Ralph Maraj, and Corporate Secretary of Fishermen and Friends of the Sea, Gary Aboud. We have a very tight program this evening, but I think we can get through it. There will be 2 rounds. In round 1, each speaker will get 5 minutes to explain why we must repeal the Procurement Amendment. In round 2, each speaker will get another 5 minutes to respond to points raised by the other panelists. At the end, we'll let you know about a petition that we want to inspire everyone watching and listening to sign. The petition link should be up on the screen. In the meanwhile, you can send in questions through our Facebook page at facebook.com UNC Political Party. We will choose the best questions to ask our panelists in the question and answer session at the end. I now hand you over to the speakers, beginning with Wade Mark, who will give us the background to why we should repeal the Procurement Amendment. Senator Mark.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. It has been said that the best disinfectant for secrecy is the sunshine of transparency. There were many labor pains leading up to the birth of Act Number 1 of 2015, known as the Public Procurement and Disposal of Public Property Act. Regulations remain outstanding, albeit in the hands of the minister since November of 2019. The PNM in opposition stalled, delayed, undermined, and sabotaged efforts to speed up its passage. Public procurement occupied pride of place in the PNM's 2015 manifesto, as well as 5 consecutive budgets between 2015 and 2020. But instead of faithfully executing its sworn obligation for good governance through the swift implementation of the legislation, the Rowley-led government introduced 3 sets of amendments in 2016, 2017, and 2020, all with the deliberate intention of stalling, gutting, and emasculating the very essence of the legislation. In its final funeral rites for this most historic document, the Rowley-led regime finally eliminated the independent oversight role of the OPR by gutting Section 7 of Act Number 1 of 2015, rendering it fundamentally useless and farcical. In Section 5 of Act Number 27 of 2020, the Rowley-led government weaponized the legislation to facilitate open theft and pilferage of public money through several mechanisms. The Cabinet has now assumed the responsibility without any independent oversight for the 4 stages of the procurement process, namely planning, bidding, evaluation, and implementation of all treaties and agreements with other states and entities, all agreements with international financing institutions, all agreements for technical cooperation, all financial, legal, audit, and accounting, medical, and other services determined by the Cabinet, all public-private partnership agreements. In a word, the Rowley-led kleptocratic administration has legalized thievery, banditry, and naked corruption in this nation. This is an abomination. The Rowley regime spent some $35 billion in every year on the acquisition of goods, services, and other works. Over the past 5 years, this Rowley-led government has spent over $170 billion without a scintilla of effective accountability, transparency, integrity, and value for money. No country worthy of its name can continue to permit such a scandalous injustice to their economy and democracy, whose guardrails are being profoundly weakened. We need urgent intervention, powerful resistance, and organized action to cage this wild beast which has been let loose on the people by this reckless and irresponsible administration. We therefore demand not only the swift repeal of Act Number 17 of 2020, but the unconditional laying of all the regulations necessary to give effect to this legislation. Ladies and gentlemen, let us collectively, as a nation, bring a swift end to legalize thievery, banditry, robbery, and naked corruption of the public purse in this beautiful country of Trinidad and Tobago. I wish to thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Senator Mark. Very well keeping within the time frame. I'd like to invite Timothy Hamel-Smith to speak next. Mr. Hamel-Smith.
Hi, good evening, viewers, and welcome to all the members of the panel. I think one of the questions when we talk procurement, the very first question that is fundamental that we need to ask is, what do we want? Do we want to be a successful nation? Or do we want to be considered an underprivileged, undeveloped third world nation? Do we want to be a country in which equity prevails? Or do we want a country in which the poverty levels continue to increase? If you look at what constitutes a successful nation, you only have to look at the corruption perception index, and you will note that the top 1/3 of the countries performing in there are all successful nations. Indeed, it is corruption which leads to the downgrading of a country. Rampant corruption does not jive with success. So that is why we have to ask the question of our viewers, where do you want to be? What do you want of Trinidad and Tobago? And if you see the recommendations coming out from neutral third parties, it is always that you need to minimize corruption. And how do you do that? You minimize corruption. One of the most important fundamental pillars in order to minimize corruption is, and to lead you on the journeys to success and equal opportunity for all, is to introduce proper, good procurement legislation. Instead, what do we have? We have a government that has sought, by this last legislation, to eliminate government-to-government contracts from the purview of the regulator. And that is a retrograde step. Indeed, you have a commentator, economist such as Terence Farrell, saying that he has made a eunuch of the regulator. And you know, that just means that the regulator now has become unimportant. You have actually disempowered the regulator from an essential part of what procurement is intended to do. So, government raised this question of an amendment some time ago. I think it was last year, January. And you will see what they said is, we merely want to correct an ambiguity that appears in the Act relative to government contracts. Indeed, they castigated the Express, who in its editorial remarked that the government were about to remove government contracts from the purview of the regulator. But the reality of what we're suffering from now as a result of that amendment is worse. It's worse that, in fact, removing an ambiguity regarding government-to-government contracts. What we've done is said that those contracts no longer do the government have to be accountable. Do we have to have integrity, transparency, or value for money? And there's no longer equity. And such contracts do not have to abide by what is considered the socio-economic policies of Trinidad and Tobago. So what does that say to you? The government is really telling the public, we in charge, not a damn dog bark, and we will do as we please because we are the government of the country. And that is not acceptable. We must rise up and we must call upon them to change this legislation. And that's all I would like to say for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hamel-Smith. I think those are very, very pertinent points. I'd like to invite Karen Nunez-Tesheira next. I think you're on mute. Could you unmute yourself?
Sorry.
Yes, good.
I
We can
think
hear
I
you
did.
now.
Are you hearing me now?
Yes.
So I'm like an advertisement, actually. Good evening to all the panelists and, of course, the viewership and the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. I consider this a watershed moment for preserving the democracy of our country and the socio-economic development of our beloved nation. Before I make my short contribution within the time frame allotted to all of us, I want to make it lucidly clear, as is often said, that I come here as an independent voice. I come here as a concerned citizen, and I believe I am keeping good company. From the Law Association of Trinidad and Tobago, to the various chambers of commerce, to the commentators of all or no political stripes, underscored by the resignation of two of the commissioners, one of whom said that the legislation had been eviscerated or gutted. So I think that, and I should add also, the President of our Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, Pauline Weeks. So in the time allotted to me, I intended to focus on two areas, but I'll keep to one area, and that is commenting on the comments or defense, as it was called, by the Honorable Prime Minister, Dr. Keith Rowley, when he defended the inclusion of the, when I say, I should better say the exclusion of certain services from the oversight, from the overview of the regulator. And those services are medical, legal, and I believe any other service also that the minister may wish to add. Now, what I found was very telling. He was addressing his comments to the opposition leader, but he was speaking to the people of Trinidad and Tobago. And he said, and I quote, "Where you ever heard you could hire a lawyer on the basis that he gives you the lowest price? Where on earth have you heard that you choose a doctor who gives you the lowest price for medical services? You, Prasad Pasasa, want to come and tell me we must choose a lawyer of the lowest price?" From the Prime Minister, I think he knows very well that that is not correct. He very well knows that it is not the lowest price. He very well knows because in 2004, a PNM administration left, which at that time was Mr. Patrick Manning, sent out a policy document on passing a procurement legislation. They looked at three models, and the model that they decided to adopt was what they call the principal model. It's in the preamble to the legislation, and it says very clearly accountability, transparency, and value for money. They also added integrity. So you do not have to be a rocket scientist to know that value for money can never mean the lowest price. In fact, the document it says gives you the definition of value for money, and it is the achievement of the best combination of price and quality to meet the particular needs in the shortest possible time. But you can go to a dictionary and you'll find the definition, and even in the legislation. Now, why do I bring that up in particular? Because immediately after castigating, and I say castigating the opposition leader for wanting us to accept the lowest price by including those services under the oversight of the regulator, he went on to say, and then the former Attorney General, trained by you, would put in the lowest bid, and you want to ask this government, as you do in your party, and as you did in your government, to hire people who are disgraced because they win the lowest bid. So I asked the Prime Minister, if he's so keenly aware of the potential for abuse, not abuse by any administration, he is our gatekeeper, he is our guardrail, he is the person to look after our interests, not only for this administration, but future administrations. So why, if you're so keenly aware of potential abuse, why would you remove that protection? And I will recall for the Prime Minister what he said in October 19, 2009, when he said that UDCOT, which is now under his office, he declared it was 10 times worse than the airport authorities. And he even said He was fired from cabinet because he wanted as housing minister, he was demanding accountability on UDCOL. So this is a prime minister who is very well aware of the importance of accountability and transparency. Administration, you said that about a PNM administration, and we can't forget prime minister, and I mean no disrespect, 5,000 houses of the Chinese and have not had the oversight of the office of the regulator. So I ask the prime minister, as the person in charge of this country at this moment, I ask of him that he reconsider his position, being so keenly aware of the importance of putting in those checks and balances into our system, because it reminds me of a saying which we're all familiar with, colloquialism. Otherwise, it may look like you're making track for Gucci to run. Thank you very much. I think I made it in my 5 minutes.
Absolutely, and a very powerful 5 minutes
Yes.
that was. Thank you very much for that. All three excellent contributions so far. The next presenter is Mr. Ralph Maraj.
Right. Well, look, I welcome the opportunity to participate in this forum dealing with a matter of fundamental importance to the good governance of Trinidad and Tobago. I congratulate the United National Congress for organizing this forum, and I'm very pleased to be in such esteemed company with all my other presenters. Let me start by saying that I have repeatedly made the point over the last 5 years or so that by cheating a nation of its resources for its development, corruption steals food from the mouths of the poor. And I am not too sure, and I think it's our responsibility, I'm not too sure that the ordinary folk in Trinidad and Tobago sees the link between malpractices in procurement and their own poverty and the very food that they eat. Now, the Procurement Act of January 2015 was intended to reduce the disease of corruption infesting this nation since the start of self-government over 60 years ago. It brought all procurement transactions under the scrutiny of a powerful procurement regulator and board with independent powers and with the obligation to report to Parliament via the Speaker. The regulator's report would be subject to the careful scrutiny of the Public Accounts Committee within 90 days of each fiscal year. This was a lovely start, a strong start in 2015. But of course, and that is why we are here today, fears have arisen that the act has been emasculated, gutted, rendered toothless by this PNM administration, whose amendments will remove transparency in billion-dollar government contracts and disposal of public property. This cannot be countenanced, and many voices have been raised. Leading transparency advocate Afra Raymond, for example, he sees the change as, and I quote, a serious blow to the long-term campaign for proper control over transactions in public money, and are extremely detrimental to the public interest. He says the government seems to be of the view that the biggest contracts executed with public money are better administered without independent oversight as intended by Act No. 1 of 2015. Taking a similar position as you heard tonight is Opposition Senator Wade Mark. He says the amendment to the parent legislation kills transparency, accountability, integrity, and value for money, and he concludes that the government is effectively legalizing naked corruption. But to me, and to many others, it is even worse than that. The amendments constitute a corruption of our very democracy in Trinidad and Tobago. They remove the people completely from the protection and management of their own resources. For example, the amendments eliminate independent oversight in the sale and disposal of public assets and public property like the Petrotrin lands and the refinery. Professor Selwyn Kojo, himself a member of the People's National Movement, he says plainly in his articles, and I quote, "The recent changes in the Procurement Act demonstrate a continuing tendency to remove the people's business from their control and to place it in an ever-tightened center called a cabinet. This tendency tightens its grip around the necks of an unaware population." That is the point, an unaware population, right? And gradually disenfranchises ordinary people and places the control of their affairs in the hands of a wealthy ruling clique. And that is why campaign finance reform is so critical to accompany this as well. But that we'll talk about that another time. Kojo continues, "As the poor people struggle to be free, this ruling clique does everything to solidify their power over us, believing that it is their natural right to control their subjects." And hear this from Kojo, a member of the PNM. He says the PNM, it seems, is always working in the interests of their wealthy friends rather than the people who elected them. As I say, democracy is threatened. Terence Farrell agrees with that, obviously. He says the government has made, and I quote, "a preemptive assault on the office of the procurement regulator, rendering it a eunuch." The PNM administration seems allergic, he says, to institutions which are independent within the executive and run by unelected persons. That is what Farrell says. And Afro Raymond also comments on this aspect of it. He sees the threat. He says the PNM government has effectively crippled our independent oversight agency, and this is merely the latest chapter in that party's long-term and deep hostility to any such oversight. I want to say to you tonight that this threat to our democracy posed by the amendments to this piece of legislation this threat is not new in this administration. There's a long list. Recently, the Law Association had to chastise the National Security Minister for questioning the role of attorneys in recent court proceedings seeking to prevent deportation of Venezuelan immigrants.
Excuse me, Ralph,
that reminded the nation. All right.
Yes.
That reminded the nation the courts must uphold the laws and hear and determine all applicants before them and so on. You know, we have had surreptitious amendments to the Central Bank Act, making it 5 amendments, and you can go on and on. I have a whole list of infractions, a whole list of threats to the democracy of Trinidad and Tobago posed by this administration. So as in summary, what I am saying to you here tonight is that whilst the amendment to the Procurement Act destroys transparency and accountability in the critical area of governance, it is also part of an ongoing threat to our democracy posed by this administration. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you, Ralph. Thank you very much. I know we are very passionate about this issue, and you obviously are. I want to, last but not least, certainly not least, Mr. Gary Aboud. Please. Can you unmute, please, Gary?
Thank you, Kirk. Thank you, Auntie Kamala, for having this beautiful evening, and special greetings to your eloquent speakers, also much more accomplished than I. When you asked me, Kirk, to join this, I asked you, why me? With all of these speakers, you don't need me. And you said that I bring a certain groundedness. When I asked my mother, what should I say? I said I was nervous. She said, just speak the truth. Don't worry what anybody thinks. So after hearing Ralph speak, I get very angry. When I read him, I get angry as well. So I'm not going to be a diplomat. I've never been a diplomat, and I just want to say it like it is. Our audience is sitting on an armchair, rocking back, listening to us. We are a spectator show, and the time for them to act is now. We are here as an independent group. Like all of you who are speaking tonight, we represent red, white, and black. Some listeners have divisional ideas about who they are and who they represent, but we represent Trinidad and Tobago. And as a starting point, I want to compare Trinidad with our measly $6 billion. When previous governments were in power, we fought for a heritage fund. We got it, and it's only $6 billion. Norway has 1,100 billion US dollars in their heritage fund, almost 200 times more than us. And they do have more oil and gas, but not much more. Why? We have had 60 years of independence. Eric Williams, if you read Afra's articles, he brings you back to the Hansard where Eric Williams himself fought against the Tenders Act. Most people are not aware that the government is a business. They are buying and selling. And what we've spoken about tonight is their buying side, that they're buying. The PNM bought 170 million. The previous government before them bought probably the equivalent amount in goods and services. But what are we selling? We are selling our resources, our mangoes, our fruit, and we don't know what it's being sold for. So this critical legislation, we had met with parliamentarians as long as from when the Pandey government was in power. We met with the president then, and we were led to believe, an election after election, it would surface and never be passed. In 2014, 2015, we got it, but the critical component to enact it was never passed. So the Rowley government promised and promised and promised. For 6 years, we got promises. And then when we got it, it got watered down. So the most critical contracts, the most critical areas where we are selling our goods and services, mine and yours, but mine before yours. And yet nobody seems to care. You could go into anybody's home and take their possessions, take their wives, take their children, and sell them, and nobody cares. Why is it that we feel so disenfranchised in our country? There's nowhere else for us to go. This is where we are. We are not going anywhere. So why aren't we fighting for what is ours? Why are our listeners looking at us like a circus show? We are not an entertainment movement. We are fighting for according to Ralph, for hungry children. So the squandermania of the resource curse continues. It has happened for 60 years, and unless we do something now, unless we act together as one, we will perish together as fools. And I'm not against any politician. Everyone's ambitious, but this is about a movement to protect the unborn, the vulnerable, the innocent, the voiceless. And we don't have an option to decide. We must act. The Porter's Pain port can be privatized tomorrow morning, and we'll read about it after. We will never know what they sold it for. China is buying up everything they could put their hands on, and they're lending as much as they can lend, and they will take it back tenfold when we can't pay. And yet we are blinded by it. We lost the Pitch Lake. Our Pitch Lake gone forever, foreign owner, Chinese owned. Labre is about to disappear. We just read about bid rigging for contracts. It happens on all sides. Invaders Bay is advertised. I asked my mother, I said, Mom, you know, Fishermen and Friends of the Sea should pay the $7,500 and make an application for Invaders Bay as a public entertainment area. She said, Gary, they already give it out already. They're just going through a formality. And this law, the weakening of this law allows them to privatize Invaders Bay without us knowing. Udicott.
Gary, can we wrap up?
Compared to other countries, we have an opportunity before us we must not waste. Academics, university professors, leaders in business, church leaders, we have a golden opportunity to address a critical situation. Lawlessness breeds lawlessness. According to Benazir Bhutto, when she spoke to George Bush Sr., she said, when you turn your eye to lawlessness in one corner of the world, every law in every corner of the world is weakened. If we allow this big law to pass us, then God help us for the next 60 years. So I look forward to your petition and to actions and activities where we can have a national movement to change the politics so that we develop a public interest culture. I thank you all for allowing us to join you here tonight.
Thank you very much, Gary. I'd like to ask the timekeepers how much time we have left for round 2. We're going to start round 2, and we may have to cut down to 4 minutes per presenter. Is that correct? All right, let us do that. I'm just getting confirmation. So in round 2, we want to hear from the speakers, their reactions to what the others have said, and then we will close up with the Honorable Kamla Prasad-Bissessar. So let us start, please, with Timothy Hamel-Smith.
I think crucial to what we must consider is a point that Ralph made, is that the people who will suffer most as a result of not having proper procurement legislation is the poor person. The people at the top of the rung are going to get by. They're going to make do. But it is the people who are at the bottom rung of the ladder who will suffer most. Because when a country loses its wealth, and loses its wealth because it is pilfered away, because corruption becomes endemic, they are the ones who suffer the most. And they may not recognize that what we do today impacts on how they will live tomorrow. It impacts on every single one of us. Corruption has been said to be the problem that has not allowed countries to move beyond where they are to become successful. There is nothing in this world that prevents Trinidad and Tobago, with all its potential, to becoming successful, other than the fact that we get mired in corruption. And this is the first step. There are other pillars that we need to consider. But this first step, certainly when it came in 2015, I thought we had started on that journey to becoming a successful nation. And now we have reversed course. We have gone in the opposite direction, and we have opened the doors to more corruption rather than less. And I would like to leave that there with our viewing audience and say that you need to be with us and come with us and adopt the proposals we make in order to reverse this. Not doing it is something we suffer at our peril. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Timothy. And just to let the viewers know, we are on Facebook as well. And we will, after the televised broadcast, we will continue on Facebook, take your questions, and the panelists would be able to expand on whatever points you wish them to do. So next I would like to invite Karen Nunez-Tesheira for her thoughts in this round 2. I think you'd have to unmute, please, Karen.
Yes. And I'm going to try to stick within the 4 minutes, because I think the passionate pleas of both Gary Aboud and Ralph Maraj really are very touching and really speak to the movement and speak to what is at risk and what we as a nation. And this is why I have joined my voice. I have gotten criticism for being part of this, but my country comes first. And I want to say that in doing this, because I think I understand the importance of this legislation. I understand that what we are opening our country to is more corruption and unbridled corruption. I think Gary Aboud said it very well. And what I also felt that what Ralph Maraj said about disenfranchising so many of our people who they do not really understand the impact of the legislation. I just want to say very quickly, when Wade Mark spoke, he talked about the Section 63 and the delay. And I think people may not understand that the Section 63 passage of those regulations, until those regulations are made into law, none of the government entities have to follow it. It's discretionary, it is not mandatory. So when, and I think disrespect that Colin Imbush showed in January 2014, when the Express asked him, when are you going to pass the regulations? In January 2019, he said he's not a post office box, and he said he's not a post office box, and he's not a rubber stamp. But this is February 2021, and up to now, you have not passed the regulations, and you have to ask yourself why. And I want to end finally by a statement from none other than the President of our Republic, Paula May Weeks. And when she said in her annual address, The people of Trinidad and Tobago are not sympathetic to hackneyed excuses, promises of action, and sub-stories of doing one's best. It is only the result of repeated distractions, obfuscations, and outright lies by successive administration that they have become jaded and skeptical about matters in the public domain. She then cited as examples the procurement legislation, the border security issue, an exemption policy in respect of nationals, and she said that public officials have to stop being so secretive except in the interest of national security, and so dismissive and paranoid about the anxieties of our citizens. And I lend my voice to that, and I hope that this seminar, this webinar, will be successful, and the people of Trinidad and Tobago will wake up and be counted and insist, as the government, the previous government, when it was in opposition, when this government was in opposition, stood up and stand up and be counted and make sure that the amendments are repealed. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And just to remind you, so we do have a petition for the people to sign, and we will get to that later. Thanks again. Ralph Maraj, I invite you now.
Right. So what I want to say is that in this situation, as in most other things, the politics has to lead the way. My friend Gary Aboud asked a very important question. Why is the population sitting in armchairs, being sedentary, being passive, uninvolved? The governments can do what they want. It is because of the nature of the politics, and that is one of the tragic things about Trinidad and Tobago. The politics has not mobilized the population to wake up and attend to itself and protect itself. But whenever any party is in power, any of our two major parties, the People's National Movement, the United National Congress, whichever is in power, half of the population goes silent, goes sedentary, goes passive. And that is really no party, no government. A government hardly feels the full brunt of public opinion, when they are in government. And that is the reason why they can get away with all kinds of things, as this government has been doing. Look at Petrotrin. You close down Petrotrin, which I call the Petrotrin sin, and this country has just accepted it. So that is one of the first things that we need to deal with in this country. The tribalism at the heart of our politics. And that political parties, in my view, have a responsibility to lead the way out of this tribalism that has, almost diseased political life in Trinidad and Tobago. On the two occasions when the politics tried to make that move forward, that giant step forward, in 1986 with the National Alliance for Reconstruction, in 2010, I think it was, with the People's Partnership, there was an attempt of bring the people together, to transcend the tribalism, the narrow partisan interests and tribal interests. But of course, they won the government, but the politics was never transformed. That is the first thing in answer to Gary Aboud's question as to why the population is asleep and so passive and so sedentary. The other thing that the politicians have to be convinced about, and this country has to be convinced about, is the institutional dysfunctionality in Trinidad and Tobago. Parliament should be the house of the people. But is Parliament really the house of the people? Or is Parliament just the government, just a reincarnated colonial governor with all of the power? What power does the opposition really have in the Parliament, except with one or two pieces of special legislation? Our joint select committees, do they have the power to summon anybody at all? Can people refuse to refuse to participate with impunity? Can they make any recommendations that their findings are used to pursue criminal investigation, things like that?
Yeah, we can continue in the 30 minutes after.
All right, thank you. Thank
you. Great. And finally, I know the passion takes you. Yes. And another passionate man, Gary Aboud, next. I think you may have to unmute Gary.
Valuable
Right.
time lost in my 4 minutes, but it's so bad that imagine the Prime Minister could stop in to Australia and spend $80 million on buying ships. Didn't advise, didn't consult anybody, and we have 7 of those ships that are dysfunctional. Within 2 years, they're written off. But you buy 2 more warships for the Coast Guard, and we have to take our money. People are hungry, but you could fly in like you're on a holiday where you can speak face to face, so there's no recording, there's no record of how those ships were negotiated. And then you'll tell us you don't want to buy the cheapest ship. I feel to cry. I don't know how to say it. Somebody estimated that $5 billion a year could be saved if we had the procurement regulation properly. And just imagine, we paying my good friend and relative $165 million to rent number 1 Alexander Place for 9 years, 7 of which it wasn't even occupied. 160. He could build the building 3 times with what he collected in rent in 9 years. And why aren't we checking all of the rentals for all of the properties rented by our beloved government? Why do we do a comparative analysis of what the private sector is paying for in rent compared to our beloved government, who could negotiate in private with their buddies? What about the police station in El Socorro? My God, my God. So when we talk about corruption, I'm old like Ralph. I grew up with Johnny O'Halloran, Mervyn the Swerve. Merv the Swerve, remember Mervyn the Sousa?
Yes.
Francis Pravat, a toxic heritage of treasury raiders. But poor people today are angry because they see somebody who is a hero of business, a captain of business, and the captain doesn't speak. He doesn't want to jeopardize his business or his reputation. And he wants to have plenty cocktails without details. So he's partying, having a good time, and poor people are suffering. So he gets angry when we argue and expose them. But I'm not here to make friends. Every day I read about corruption, editorials about, imagine an independent senator dare to come forward and talk about corruption in today and yesterday's paper, and you kept silent as an independent and didn't vote. What, the independent bench is owned by the ruling government? Don't they understand what we're saying? So today we have a golden opportunity. It has to start sometime. It has to start. It's evil for us to be quiet. Satan, if there is one, must be rejoicing at the silence of the masses. Everybody quiet. Don't say nothing. You're going to put your cocoa in the sun. We all have cocoa, but we have a citizenry and a public that is our first priority. So I just want to say that now is the time, and religious leaders cannot just stay on a pulpit. No, you can't stay in a mosque. You're doing a disservice to your religion by keeping quiet. I don't think there's any God that would want you to keep quiet. It is evil to keep quiet when evil is occurring in front of your eyes and you know that the treasury is being raided. Look at the cost we're paying for everything in the planet. Professors, I mean, you got your professorship and you have your salary, you have your comfort, you have your security, and you're going to get a fat pension.
Gary, you're going very good, but I'm sorry. we have to cut the time. We have the time after where we'll be freer to talk on Facebook.
We have to fight together as one. What is right. Thank you again.
Thank you. And now finally, I'd like to welcome the Honorable Leader of the Opposition, Mrs. Kamla Prasad-Bissessar, under whose patronage this historic roundtable is taking place.
Thank you very much, Dr. Megu, and your efficient way of handling this webinar, putting it in place. I thank you very much. And to all the panelists, I thank you all for joining with us to really what I think have this historic occasion on a matter that's not just about the UNC, it is not about the PNM, it is about any party. It is about the people and the children of Trinidad and Tobago. And so I agree with Wade. Wade gave us Thank you, Wade. You gave us some of the history of this legislation. And I think people be reminded or remind ourselves that Keith Rowley never wanted procurement legislation. And therefore, the promises each year to bring it takes us backwards. When they came into office in 2015, they kept it there, didn't do anything. But between 10 and 15, we had made a promise that should we form the government, we will bring all the pieces of legislation, bills, draft legislation, and it was the JCC who had elicited that promise from us, and we kept that promise, and we did bring the legislation. But the PNM, you had to take them kicking and fighting and screaming. They refused to attend the JSC meetings. They delayed this matter for so long, and then we passed it without their votes. They did not vote for it in the House. Keith Rowley and his team did not vote for the legislation. So are we surprised when for 5 to 6 years later, it's the same strategy? Delay, 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 delay. Up to today, no procurement the regulations. Promises upon promise upon promise from 2015. It is mind-boggling. And Gary, you're totally correct. You know, you say you asked the question, Ralph, help to answer it. Gary Aboud, thanks for calling me auntie. You know what, you're making me feel very young by calling me auntie. Well, thanks anyway, and thank you for joining us. Your point is, is it just us and the politicians? We come and we talk and nothing happens. And that I want to say to Karen, I mean, I was very impressed by your contribution, Karen, and also the passion in your voice. And the issue about medical and legal services now being exempted from the procurement regulators' watch jurisdiction. And let us remember, there is an Attorney General in this country who has pleaded conflict of interest and recused himself from medical matters. Why? Because there's some conflict that is related to him and his family, and then you take that out of legislation. You take legal services out. So Karen, I'm in total support what you're saying there. And then the sale of Petrotrin, for example, that others have spoken about. Ralph spoke on the Petrotrin. Timothy spoke about the emasculation of transparency and so on in this matter. I mentioned also, Timothy, you talked about the CPI. Yes, we have stayed about the same rank, but you have an Attorney General again. Sorry, you say I'm choosing him all, but I don't really like him, so that's okay. I don't like how he conducts his business. But the Attorney General as well says they've made strides in corruption, and you remain at the same. The 2020 CPI is the same, Timothy. We keep watching it over the years, no changes, and this procurement legislation was a major plank in terms of bringing greater transparency and so on. So, Gary Aboud, you talk about selling out our resources. That is why we vehemently condemned any sale of Petrotrin. But first of all, you close it down. Told the country we're not closing down Petrotrin, and then proceeded to exactly that, and then put it up for sale. You've given Patriotic, 15 days? I think those days may have expired or close to expiring now. But you closed down Petrotrin, why? What about a fake oil? What has become of a fake oil? Did you close down Petrotrin in spite of all the people who were telling you, all the studies you did to restructure it, you closed it down, and then now to sell it? And come back to Gary again, you're selling out the resources, you're selling out, you said the mangoes and the oranges and so on, the fruit. You're selling our resources, we don't know how. What, when, why, where? Sale of lands for the first time under this procurement law, for the first time in the law of Trinidad and Tobago, we had issues dealing with disposal of public property. Never had it before. Yes. So you could have sold what you wanted, given away what you wanted, give license, give a little letter, give a lease, any which way. And we did that. We included disposal of public property. It could be land, it could be petrol land, it could be Invaders Bay, you mentioned. So many other things that where you're going to be giving away. You're going to sell out gas stations. You're going to sell out the port. The legislation must include the sale of lands, and that is a very serious area that not much attention has been given to, but the government intends to sell out everything. Sell out the resources, Gary Aboud said. How? We come back again with an unaware population. So tonight I said let's not let all this talk take us away. I have here a petition which we've released today, and I just want to read it for you and ask as many of you as possible to sign on to this petition, and let us take this forward. And it is basically to announce Trinidad and Tobago stop corruption in government contracts, repeal the procurement amendments. We, the undersigned, call on government of Trinidad and Tobago to repeal the Procurement Amendment Act of 2020, and I would include here the previous ones, 17, wait, was it 2017,
Yes.
2016,
16 and 17.
17, and 2020,
Yes.
to repeal those amendment acts of 2016, 17, and recently, last year, 2020, and restore the Public Procurement and Disposal of Property Act 1 of 2015 to its original form. This was the most important instrument to fight corruption in the history of Trinidad and Tobago, and we, the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, respectfully demand that its integrity be kept. So here we are. Kirk, thank you. You said procurement is just a fancy way of saying giving out contracts. Don't forget you have two senior officials of the government. They have kept certain things for the government to do, and that means the cabinet. So they just have to walk out of the room. One walks out. I say, I recuse myself, decision made, he comes back in, the next one walks out. That's what they're playing left foot, right foot in the cabinet. By stepping out, we need this procurement law to protect the citizens of this land and to prevent the corruption levels that can occur and which have already occurred. So I ask of you, log on to the petition and let's fully support it. Thank you very much. All of you have joined the panel. We will continue now with Kirk. Dr. Kirk will help us with questions. Is that it?
Yeah.
Yes, thank you very much.
Well, for our television viewers and our radio listeners, I want to thank you. I want to thank you for tuning in, and I want to thank the panelists on your behalf. And we're going to be continuing this discussion on Facebook, so you can join us there, where you can ask our panelists further questions, and they'll have more time to expound and explain. Yes, and Jagriti will also continue as well, so you can also look on Radio Jagriti. And once again, we remind you, the petition can be found at change.org. I hope on the screen we can have it there. On Facebook, we could definitely have the link there on our Facebook page. That is, I will say, facebook.com UNC Political Party. That's it. So, please sign the petition. Please share it with your friends, your family, and colleagues. Let's send the government a signal that we will not take this abuse. We want the original Procurement Act passed as it was. And we look forward to your support. I thank all the panelists once again. And we will continue the discussion on Facebook. So, good night. Thank you. Goodbye. Right. We're going to continue and put this on Facebook. Somebody was, and Jagriti as well. I know the questions were supposed to be curated. Do we have some questions here? Great. Right, okay. Oh yes, and TV6 from 8:30 will be broadcasting, a delayed broadcast from what we were starting at 7:30. So, first of all, as we wait for the questions to come in, let me open the floor again to any one of our panelists. Is there anything you wanted to add that we couldn't add during the televised part? I'll open it up. I know we cut off Ralph, we cut off Gary, and Karen and Timothy were very, very, very disciplined. Appreciate that, as was Senator Mark. You have an opportunity if you want to say something right now as we await the questions.
I would like to compliment Senator Mark because his use of the English language was outstanding. I love the word kleptocratic and the sunshine of transparency. I had some theory.
Well, Wade, do you want to respond?
No, I just want to give the floor to Gary.
Everybody, yes. How about yourself, Timothy? I really liked your point when you started off by saying, listen, what kind of country do we want to have? We have to ask that very basic question. You want to expand a little bit on that for us, Timothy?
Well, certainly, I think that's a fundamental issue. We've been independent since 1962, and yet we keep going around in circles. I thought that 2015 was a time when we had begun the journey, because these pillars, in order to reverse corruption, are so very important. I mean, yes, it includes, you want to have independent institutions with respect to your central bank. You want to have political party financing. You want to have proper procurement legislation. You want to have a fiscal council. That's the sort of independent institutions that we need to have. But instead, what we're doing is, in fact, emasculating all of our independent institutions. And that is a sign when you see institutions that are independent crumbling, no longer performing what they were supposed to do. That is a sign that your democracy becomes flawed. Something is wrong. And I think the point earlier made, was it by Gary, to say that, it's our, or Ralph, he said our politics, something is wrong with our politics. And we need to get at the very grassroots as to what our problems are. Because if we continue with tribal politics, we are, we're not going to go forward as a unified population. You need a critical mass of people in order to lead, to have a vision, to follow a vision in a particular direction if your country is going to go forward. And we not only have to go forward from standstill, we have to correct a lot of the problems from the past. And unless we get that critical mass, unless we change our political systems so that we attract the best into the political arena, we're going to continue to flounder, particularly when you could in fact make a start, pass legislation, and find that another government comes in and reverses that position. And that really does say to you that when you have legislation that requires a 3/5 majority, perhaps in order to amend fundamental elements of it, of course there will be amendments, life changes, but if you're going to change something fundamentally, you should likewise require a 3/5 majority.
Yeah.
And you can't find that another party could simply come in and reverse course and send us backward. And I think that's an important plank that we need to introduce into our system.
Timothy, if I may.
Sorry.
Okay, yeah. Kamala Prasad Bissessa and then Ralph.
Sure. On that point about the requisite majority for voting, where it is that you're amending legislation which initially required a 3/5 majority, and you want to do it by simple majority. But there's another view, and I respectfully put that forward, Timothy, that a person may want to look at. That given the fact that you've now set up a parallel tendering process, a parallel procurement process, questions will arise as to why it is that you have a discriminatory method. So for some things, government-to-government contracts, if it's a sale of petroleum lands, for some things you're going to use one route, which is to leave out the regulator, and then for others you're going to have the regulator operating. So it's a parallel tendering system, a parallel procurement system. And I would want to say that fundamentally requires a special majority. So even though the government, they escaped with a simple majority, the day they put that into effect, it's still not proclaimed, they're going to end up in the courthouse, Timothy. That is my respectful view on the law with the requisite majority that was required to pass these amendments, which in effect kill the law. I mean, we say gutted. It is more than gutted. It's killed. It's actually killed the law. So I put that
and so it's a lesson to be learned. In future, if we think it's so important, we ought to put into the legislation that if you want to amend this clause, you require a 3/5 majority.
That makes good sense, Timothy.
I'd like to interrupt for a Facebook question, and I'll ask Ralph Maraj to answer it, as well as what was raised by Timothy and Kamala Prasad Bissessa. The Facebook question is from Ciro Fisher, and he has asked, what does this mean for ministers who are contractors and businessmen? Does this exclude them once and for all in procurement? So I will ask you to comment, Ralph, and maybe any others who may wish to chime in. I think they maybe talk about
as far
what
as
the
I
law
am
says.
concerned, any minister or any minister of government has to declare his interest if procurement is involved, and if his business is involved in bidding for any contract and so on. And I don't know to what extent that takes place with any validity and any integrity and following the process. I don't know whether we have the laws and whether we have the systems in Trinidad and Tobago in our own parliament for that, whether they can indeed be implemented, whether the laws and the systems and the tradition is indeed effective as it pertains, for example, in the United Kingdom. So one would expect that a minister of government adheres to transparency and adheres to accountability and integrity. But the point I was making earlier on, our institutions are not strong enough, are not effective enough to deal with any errant ministers or any government. I mean, the parliament is for me the epitome of dysfunctionality. I mean, what happens to the people of Trinidad and Tobago after they vote? Are they still part of the process? How are their views heard, and how are their views able to influence what takes place in government? So that is the whole big question that we have to answer. Now, I have a little suspicion about the government, to maybe become over suspicious, in these times. I just want to ask one question before I make this observation about a possibility. Now, if this act as amended is not passed, it seems to me that the status quo remains, right? Right?
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah.
Right.
It's effectively
and
no law.
The status quo as it pertains is most imperfect, and it can allow for corruption to take place and bid rigging and all kinds of things, all kinds of irregularities to take place. Now, I've become a little suspicious because I've found that the Attorney General was at great lengths to show how difficult it is to implement these very amendments that they have passed in the Parliament. Sure. So he says he's urging people to stop oversimplifying the process, and that there are many steps still required at the office of the procurement regulator and outside to make this law work. And he's saying that, go to the law itself and you would see. In other words, the Attorney General has painted a picture of, great effort and great time that is involved. He says Section 63 of the Act states that the minister may, on the recommendation of the OPR, make regulations to give effect to the provisions of the Act, including regulations on the conduct of challenge proceedings and so on. He said the regulations on the challenge proceedings were critically important and important for operationalization of the legislation, and that anyone who has lost out on the procurement has the legal right to challenge. All of these regulations and so on that need to come into play, he gives us the impression that it will take a very, very long time. The Attorney General said the regulations are produced, mapping out the process, because you can't have the start of procurement. You just can't have the start of procurement. You have to deal with the challenge of procurement. Just read it again, what he has said, which suggests to me, made me very suspicious, this whole thing could be a charade to maintain the status quo, to give the impression that they are actually trying to do something.
When nothing is happening, Ralph. You're correct. You're correct, Ralph.
Under which they can.
You're very correct.
If I may.
Yes.
I beg your pardon?
Karen.
Okay, Karen. Yes.
Yes. What I wanted to say, I'm unmuted, right?
Yes.
You can hear me, right?
We can hear.
Yes. What I wanted to say is that we recently, on a station which I do a co-host, we had the procurement regulator on the show. And so we asked him, where have you reached in terms of putting things in place? And so to answer what Ralph is saying, he said to us that he has done a lot of the training, they've standardized the documents. In other words, as far as he's concerned, they are ready to go. So that from their point of view, what they're waiting for is for the minister to pass the regulations so that they make it law. But as far as they're concerned, all the things that they are supposed to have done in terms of training and, as I said, and standardizing documents and contracts, it has already been done.
Well, hear this. The Attorney General has said, for anybody, I'm quoting him here, for anybody, including the Office of the Procurement Regulator, to suggest that the matter is almost immediately ready for operationalization, I urge you to go to the law itself. So he's contradicting the OPR.
Well, let's
Ralph, it's the same point that they have been delaying for 6 years, finding one excuse after another. I recall when the regulator had said the regulations had been drafted. They were sent to the Minister of Finance. When we asked about it in the Parliament, the Minister of Finance said he has a lot of work to do. So they have just been delaying. I think that we need this petition. We need a public outcry. And you raise a very important point in the question here from Mr. Fisher, I think it is, or Ms. Fisher. What does this mean for ministers who are contractors and so on, and businessmen? Does it exclude them once and for all in procurement? The point is they've taken it out. They've taken out certain things, medical services, legal services, financial services. So if ministers are involved, it goes to where? To the cabinet. Himself. That's what this was about. The present system, and now with these amendments, is this: a parallel system for things that will go in the cabinet, and if a cabinet minister has an involvement, he says, okay, I have a conflict of interest, I'm stepping outside. The rest of his colleagues say, yes, sir. He comes back in, the next one goes. So with the procurement law that we passed, Act 1 of 2015, this was also going to be hampered, hindered. It could not. The cabinet will not take a decision on a cabinet colleague getting a recusal and then getting an Alexandra Place for millions for your family. I mean, it can't be right. So you've gutted it in that way to remove dealings, government to government, to remove medical, financial, accounting. Legal. Why? And then the sale of lands is a whole different ballgame again now, because a lot of state lands are being given away by leases and otherwise. I've said that. The only way you could prevent corrupt persons, who might be ministers or being contractors and so on, is with the Act 1 of 2015. That had dealt with that question of ministers' involvement in getting contracts for themselves and their families.
We have two more questions from Facebook here that I'll read both of them and leave it open to whoever would like to answer. So one is, what logical reason could the government have for making the amendments they did? So let's see that again. What logical reason could the government have for making the amendments that they did? So is there logic behind it? So that's one. Good question. And the other one is, will the petitions have any effect, the petitions that we're asking for? So one is, what logical reason was there, and will the petitions have an effect? I'll open it up.
If I may say this, when it came to the question of what is there a logical reason put forward, if you listen to interview held by the Minister of Finance, he was saying that when we enter into government-to-government contracts, then the law of the country of the other government should apply, and therefore what he said then was that we need to take out an ambiguity created by the clause. But he didn't take out an ambiguity, he took out the whole clause.
Yeah, and more.
What he did, in fact, I mentioned that the Express had said that's what he was doing, and he was he railed against the Express for having said that I didn't say that I was going to remove the clause. I said we're going to remove the ambiguity. But in fact, what they did was remove the clause. Mm-hmm. And it's more than removing the clause regarding the governing law for the contract. It took out the question of value for money, the principles regarding accountability, transparency, efficiency. It took out the socio-economic principles of Trinidad and Tobago, which means you can go do whatever you damn well please, and devil take the hindmost. That's what the effect of that was. And so he put forward that as a rationale, because some countries wouldn't allow us to use our law to govern a contract that they were putting forward. And yet he went further than that. He emasculated the act.
Anybody else want to say about either the logical reason or will these petitions have any effect?
Well, the petition, if you allow me, the petition is not an end in itself. The petition is a beginning of public empowerment. When we started FFOS, I was shy. My president, Terence Beddoe, he was a UN retiree. He never went on a pavement in his life. No one likes having to go out and walk a pavement and rah-rah, but what are the tools that are available to us to represent that we are here? And this idea of closet activists and closet people with opinions who sit down at home with their armchair and criticize everybody else for what they're doing until they succeed. This must stop. I want to point out, Kirk, that one of the things that is removed is medical services or any other services as the minister sees fit. Now, the Newsday reported that we are paying $74 for the Moderna and $39 for the Pfizer. The
vaccine.
For the vaccine for the COVID, but the Moderna is €18, according to the Belgian minister who posted it on Facebook, and the Pfizer is €12. So we have lots to decide. All of a sudden, we paid 3 times more than we should. So if it is that a congregation sees the Archbishop at the head of the procession, praying and walking with his flock who are demonstrating, then it takes on a different angle. And the idea that many people are, pining away, we don't have carnival, and I feel a real sense of patriotism with the music of carnival, the steelman music and the calypso and the entertainment of social commentary. But is it that citizens of Trinidad are so shallow that they only consider our culture to be a ding-a-ling and a jab-jab and a liming? That is symptomatic of a much deeper essence of who we are. So is it that we have recolonized ourselves for a second time, so that we are no longer really citizens of this republic, but we consider ourselves to be colonized by American politics? The average citizen in Trinidad could tell you more about Biden and Donald Trump than they can. Then they can tell you about our own politicians and about what is happening locally. So this is a real sort of identity crisis. And for those of you who are listening, you have an opportunity to share your message and share your truth. And each one of us, that's all we can do. So,
can I just...
Yeah, Karen? I get you. We went on mute. You were unmuted and now you're muted.
Okay.
Yeah.
And now you're hearing me?
That's right.
I think I haven't got thing of this whole muting and unmuting, but I just wanted to say the reason that I'm here, because I really feel that we have to stand up and be counted now. If we allow the government to get away with this procurement legislation, then we really are truly going in a situation where we're looking at the what we call the frog, the metaphor of the frog in the tepid water.
Yeah.
The frog in the tepid water, he doesn't realize that until the water is boiling and it's too late that he wants to jump out. We as citizens, this is why I feel so strong. This has nothing to do with UNC, COP, PDP, you call anybody. As a matter of fact, I think I'm taking a risk to be seen, to be part of this, because people would say, oh, she is, coming on a UNC platform. I'm not coming on a UNC platform. I'm coming on a Trinidad and Tobago platform.
Right.
I'm coming on a citizen platform.
Yes.
And if I am being given the opportunity to speak to the people of Trinidad and Tobago, to stand up and be counted, to listen to what your president has said to you. She said there's secretiveness, there's paranoia, people are afraid to say anything. We have to stand up and be counted, and this is our opportunity. COVID-19 or no COVID-19, we have to let the government of Trinidad and Tobago know that we will not allow them to take out that procurement legislation and in fact, as it said, gut it, eviscerate it, neuter it. We can't allow it.
Absolutely.
And I speak as a citizen of this country.
And yourself and all other citizens, I want to let all our citizens know that the link to the petition, it's in the description of the live stream video on Facebook. And you can, and I can announce that persons can, so you can click the link in the description to sign the petition. So click it, then you can sign it and share it. Whenever you sign the petition, share it on email, share it on Twitter, share it on Instagram. Well, I don't know if Instagram has sharing, but sharing on Facebook with your friends. There are two other questions, three actually, from Facebook. So one is, what can I do as a regular, average citizen to help in this movement? One thing I would want to say is share this petition widely. Print it out. We will also take pieces of paper with written signatures, and we will also physically present that. So that is one thing, and I will open up everybody else to answer there. The second one is, how does this procurement law affect me as an average man on the street? Right? So I think a lot of people, they don't even know what procurement actually means.
Wade could answer that one.
Yeah, and someone asked a more technical question, is it rational that legislation can be passed with a 3/5 majority, but then destroyed by a simple majority? So these questions, anybody, floor is open.
Wade, how does it affect the ordinary man?
Yeah. Ralph said earlier that when it comes to procurement and the absence of good procurement law, it takes literally food out of the mouths of the citizens. Transparency International has defined corruption as the use of public office or the abuse of public office for private gain. So when you don't have proper procurement legislation to ensure that there's transparency, accountability, fairness, integrity, and value for money, it means that the $35 billion that the government of Trinidad and Tobago spends every year to purchase goods and services without any system or form of meaningful accountability, monies can end up in the pockets of the corrupt. And when monies enter...
How does the poor man suffer? I think that's the gist of it there.
Yeah. How the poor man suffers. You suffer because monies that's supposed to go in the provision of purchasing bed sheets for the hospitals cannot be purchased. Laptops and tablets that our children need, 65,000 of them, they cannot access laptop. That money and so on has been pilfered, has been stolen, instead of going to children. So these are some examples of how it impacts upon the poor in our country.
Because we are a much richer country than our balance sheet shows, and it's the corruption. But let me invite others if they want to answer that about what can someone do as a regular average citizen, how does the procurement law affect them, and about the technical question about passing a law with a 3/5 majority but negating it with a simple majority.
Well, the first thing we need to do as citizens, as simple citizens, is inform yourself. That is the first weaponry that you have, is to be informed. The second thing is to share the information. And the third thing is to act on it. And never think that you're powerless, because we hold the key to our treasury in our hands. It is ours, Kirk. It is ours. People tend to think this thing that it's somebody else. I from somewhere else. I born in Guyana. One sense of alienation that what we have is not ours. We sit on the Extractive Industry Transparency Institute, and what we have been driving for the past 8 years, and we're about to be removed, probably because of what we're driving for. We want to know what value does Trinidad and Tobago get for what volume is extracted. And it's glaring when you look at the quarry sector about the volume of aggregate that they take out. Even the Auditor General complained that we have no oversight as to what volume is being extracted. So we are being paid royalty that is determined by the extractor. So all we want to know is how much are they taking. A simple statistic like that we can't get. Is that accidental? This procurement regulation does not specifically deal with that now. But when you are selling the asset and you have to determine what value we get for the volume that we don't know, at least we would have had a procurement regulator to say, wait now, if you're taking out a truckload of gravel and you're selling it for $4,000 to the truckman, how much are you paying to Trinidad and Tobago? There must be some index we could compare to Bolivia, Ecuador, Miami, etc., 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 and come up with a mean value to protect our treasury. Because what we are doing, we are selling our assets to the private sector. How much did we sell Pitch Lake for? It's gone. How much are we going to sell Invaders Bay for? It's about to go to Port of Port of Spain, Petrotrin, and the list goes. Currently missing 4,000 acres of land. They can't find it. So we are not a poor country. We are a country full of assets. And I would join forces with any political party, any political aspirant, as long as we are fighting as one for the common good. Because as Timothy explained in the beginning, there's a spiritual side of protecting the poor. And all of your panelists tonight, I looked at them. We are all relatively successful, independent, accomplished, and we have nothing to gain from this whole event or this public interest, but we have a mission to share our vision with people so that they can feel the power that we all have. Yep. I hope I'm touching at least one person who will take a keener interest.
Right. No, that's brilliant. I don't know if anybody has anything to add. Is there another question coming in? Yeah. All right. This will be the last question for the evening, and then we'll wrap up. It's really been great so far. Okay. Somebody wants to know, this is Sarah Queen from Facebook. Can you please explain the repeal process? Yeah, so somebody would like to know about that. Anybody?
The repeal process is very, very simple. A bill can be taken to the Parliament tomorrow or the day after, or any day, coming day, and all it has to say that this repeals Procurement Amendment Act 2016, yeah. Procurement Amendment Act 2017, and Procurement Amendment Act 2020. That's all. That's it. That's it, and it's gone. Those three things will go. There is no work involved in doing it because the provisions are already there. We had dealt with these provisions to prevent corruption, to prevent overreach, really overreach by the executive arm in disposal of our assets that Gary has spoken so passionately about, in buying things. You've gone down to Australia one trip and you buy 2 boats. Can you imagine we made another trip? Would we have got more boats? I don't know. You make one trip.
And why Australia?
Well, because they bought ships from those people before, all parked up and never worked. Never worked. They were there, they were there down somewhere. So it is that in terms of the repeal process, it's a simple process, and it's always said if you're standing and pushing one finger, pushing one alone, it's too weak, but when you have all the fingers together, you have greater punch. You can do more. So let's add our voices to those who are already out there who feel very passionately about the repeal, and as I said, the repeal is very, very, very simple. We take it to Parliament, the government will bring it to Parliament for repeal, or maybe we could take a private bill, Wade.
Yes, we can.
We take a private bill, let's consider that. Although there is something in the law which we'll have to look at, within the same session of the Parliament, you cannot revisit a question that was already dealt with in that session, so we may have to wait a little longer.
I think it is support of the government.
Yeah. Well, you wanted to say something? Wade?
Yeah, I just, a number of our panelists this evening referred to the sale of or disposal of state lands. All of us would recall that in Act 17 of 2020, the government removed, according to the Minister of Finance, on the advice of the Procurement Regulation Board, that provision in Act number 1 of 2015 that gave that body the authority to overview or to have the oversight responsibility for the disposal of state lands. That was removed and it was replaced by the government having that responsibility. But I also understand that the Office of Procurement Regulation has sent documentation to the government, calling on it to establish an independent committee to deal with the disposal of state land. It cannot be left to the Minister of Finance or the Cabinet to dispose of state land. And the Office of Procurement Regulation, when they dispose of that function, made it very clear to the Attorney General that an independent committee must be appointed. To date, that committee has not been appointed. But I want to just bring to the attention of the panel that in Act number 5 of 2016, they inserted a new Part 6A after Section 57 of the Parent Act, which says, and I quote, disposal of state lands. 57A1 reads, notwithstanding the State Lands Act and any other written law to the contrary, the minister may make regulations, that is the Minister of Finance, in respect of the disposal of the following: A, state lands; B, real property owned by the government; C, real property owned by state-controlled enterprises; and D, real property owned by a statutory body, responsibility for which is assigned to a minister of government. And it says in subsection 2, regulations made under this section shall be subject to negative resolution of Parliament. The Minister of Finance, after this bill was passed in 2016, became law in 2016, is yet to bring regulations to deal with the disposal of state land. And they categorize all the areas of state lands that he must bring regulation to govern and to guide in the same disposal.
So what is the situation now, if I may? The situation is that none of that is part of the law of Trinidad and Tobago because it has not been proclaimed. The Parent Act was never proclaimed, A few sections were proclaimed when we were there, and we had a lot of help from then Timothy Hamel-Smith, who had a committee set up, he chaired, to see how best to implement as fast as we could. So apart from a few minor sections of the Parent Law, Act 1 of 2015, setting up the procurement board, the officers for that board and so on, those are proclaimed. But the rest of it, the belly of the beast, has not been, law has not been proclaimed. Either the 2015 in total, the 2016 amendment way, which you read, the 2017 amendment, which we talked about, and 2020, none of that is in the law. So what's in the law? You know what is in the law? The status quo. The status quo is the CTB,
Central Tenders
Central
Board.
Tenders Board, has a process. Several statutory enterprises, they have a process to buy and sell things. And that is where all the corruption has been taking place. This is why this law was so important, modern procurement law, and it's still not proclaimed. So they can fly back down to Australia and buy 2 more boats. And with the amendments they made, they can still do it, because they have exempted certain things, government-to-government relations and so on. They can, all the other things, it's very concerning to me, the sale of the gas stations. They said they will offer it to the people who operate them, and or to people who have a franchise.
A franchise, yeah.
Franchise. Yes. So if a man has a gas station now, he has his license from NP to run the station, and he can't raise the money to buy it. Or a franchise man has more money, and therefore he may be able to pay a higher price. So the smaller man, will not get it.
That's right.
Again, we have no proper procurement or disposal of how these gas stations will go down. How? To whom? And don't be surprised if all of those gas stations end up becoming franchises, you know.
Yeah.
Yep.
I know
So it's something to really be seriously considered about. We have no proper procurement law in place. The failure of this government, we had passed it, we could not totally implement it before we demitted office. They have taken 5 to 6 years, they have not put the things into place. The regulations you mentioned, Wade, those have not come, that's for the sale of lands. The regulations from the procurement person, Karen reminded us that the man himself said, look, we did it long ago. And he but admitted that he received it, but he had to do something with it. In a like fashion, he has received NIB reports about your savings and mine, and he fails to lay them in the parliament. He says he has something to fix in it. But when he gets it, he can't fix it. He has to lay it in the parliament. Anyway, so your question earlier about the rationale for bringing all these amendments was for them to continue to thief. It's for corruption to continue, that you withdrew these, you remove them from the procurement legislation, so that you all could go in the back room, whether it's in the front of the cabinet, the back of the cabinet, outside the cabinet, and give yourselves and your friends and your family big contracts. Big contracts, which takes you, make the point where when the $1 goes into a contract, corrupt contract, is $1 less to buy school books, is $1 less to buy the laptops, is $1 less to spend on hospital equipment, on medication. That's how it impacts corruption, impacts the entire country, and impacts most tremendously those who are least able to withstand that corruption, the ones most in need. It's a painful thing that people get millions of dollars for rentals, and you can't buy laptops today in 2021 for children. So that's what this is about. Join us online. Please sign on to the petition. As Gary Aboud told us, let's share information. Let's make each other more knowledgeable about this, and therefore that could take us in a groundswell. You say, what will the petition do? Well, it will bring knowledge at least. It will activate some, motivate some. And if we are strong enough, I said it before, if we come together, you know, patriotic nationals of this land, come together to remove this wicked, evil piece of law, I think we would have done something really well, really tremendously well.
Yes, thank you. I know Gary.
Can I just,
Yeah.
on our behalf, thank all the panelists who joined us, giving so freely of your time, of your wisdom and your knowledge. We thank you very much, and we hope we can continue to work together on other serious projects that several of you have already identified. So, Timothy, thank you. Karen, thank you. Gary, thank you. And Ralph, thank you very much. And to Wade here, my senator, thank you. And Kirk, our PRO, who has done such a great job for us. We thank you all very, very much, and have a good night.
Thank you. Good night, everybody.
Okay,
Thank you,
good night.
Kamala.
Thank you.
Good night. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen.
We'll keep in touch.
Karen looks younger each time.
Yes, Gary, Ralph.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Yeah, bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.